Welcome back to Malden's Revolution. I'm Mark Linehan. 250 years ago today, Massachusetts completed its first offensive operation against the most powerful military on Earth. This is the Battle of Chelsea Creek. 2 weeks ago, we learned about the resolve where Massachusetts had voted to remove the livestock from the islands in Boston Harbor. But the actual planning of the operation doesn't seem to have been considered a priority until May 21st, when General Thomas Gage and Admiral Samuel Graves launched a raid of Grape Island south of Boston off the coast of Hingham to secure livestock and hay. After this raid, the provincial Congress determined that the evacuation of all cattle and sheep from the Boston Harbor Islands was a priority, and our old friend, General Artemus Ward, convened a council of war to plan the attack. We don't know the exact timing of this strategy session, but we know that the provincial Congress issued its last resolve concerning the operation on May 24th, and thanks to British spies, General Gage told Admiral Graves of the operation on May 25th. Which means the Massachusetts government issued orders to the Massachusetts Army, the Army senior leadership planned their assault, and the British learned of it all within 24 hours. Additionally, 2 weeks ago, I told you how the plan was to have a significant number of the troops involved to be from the New Hampshire Regiment now stationed at Medford under the command of Colonel John Stark. And we said how this represented an astonishing regional cooperation for so early in the war. Well, it turns out the Battle of Chelsea Creek isn't just going to be Massachusetts and New Hampshire fighting side by side. Both colonies are going to be under the overall command of a general from Connecticut. And not just any general, but one of the most colorful and popular leaders of the American Revolution. Born in Salem Village, now Danvers, Massachusetts in 1718, General Israel Putnam moved to Connecticut at the age of 22 and became a legend during the French and Indian War, starting the war enlisting as a private and holding the rank of colonel when the war concluded. Like Colonel John Stark, Putnam served in Rogers' Rangers, but it was said that while Rogers sent, it was always Putnam who led the men on their most dangerous missions. One of the more interesting chapters of his military career was when he participated in the British expedition against Cuba that led to the capture of Havana. After the capture of Havana, Israel Putnam brought some tobacco seeds from Cuba back home to Connecticut. And today, Israel Putnam is considered the man who introduced Cuban cigars to America in 1762, exactly 200 years before President John F. Kennedy placed an embargo on them, a ban which is still in place. Despite being from a different colony, Israel Putnam was very popular and well-liked in Massachusetts. First of all, he was born here and came from a very old Massachusetts family, but secondly, when the British closed the port of Boston in response to the Boston Tea Party, Israel Putnam personally drove a herd of sheep up to Boston to donate as food to the suffering city. And when news of Lexington and Concord reached him at his home in Connecticut, he immediately got on his horse and rode to Cambridge, Massachusetts from his Connecticut farm in only 8 hours. So his commitment to what is now still a Massachusetts cause is unquestioned, but it still doesn't answer the question, will numerous militias from separate colonies be able to stand toe-to-toe with British regulars in open battle, especially in a battle we start? No one believes that a haphazard collection of colonial militia, only formally organized into an army a month ago, is going to be able to move swiftly or efficiently. And the British Army and the Royal Navy both believe that they will be able to respond easily to any provocation. So when May the 25th comes and goes, and there has been no attempt to evacuate the livestock on the islands as the British have been told, I assume they let down their guard a little bit. There is no evidence that the British notice the 32-man scouting party moving down the Chelsea coast to secure the route onto Hoggs and Noddles Island, and there is no evidence that they notice the 300 men leaving Cambridge on their way to Medford. The 300 men who left Cambridge that night were under the command of Colonel John Nixon, and they headed for Medford, where they linked up with Colonel John Stark's New Hampshire Regiment and headed out. The combined force of approximately 600 men marched together out of Medford and into Malden along what is now Salem Street, on their way to the Chelsea Meeting House, which was located in what is today Revere, to meet the Chelsea militia under the command of Captain Samuel Sprague and proceed with the mission. The troops are assembled in Chelsea and ready to proceed just after breakfast on the morning of May 27th. So the British have been mindful of the general objectives of this operation for 48 hours. But unfortunately for the British, May 27th, 1775 happened to be a very special day for our old friend, Admiral Samuel Graves. Admiral Samuel Graves was raising his colors for the first time as the newly promoted Vice Admiral of the White. Vice Admiral of the White was a senior rank in the Royal Navy back in 1775. The British Navy at the time was organized into 3 naval squadrons: the Red Squadron, the White Squadron, and the Blue Squadron. So being the Vice Admiral of the White made you the 5th highest ranking officer in the entire Royal Navy. And that's today's very old Old World word. Now, Graves is not only celebrating his first official day at his new higher rank. His beloved nephew, Lieutenant Thomas Graves, in command of the HMS Diana, has just returned from a patrol off the coast of Maine. Admiral Graves has no children of his own and spends a great deal of time and effort advancing the career and prospects of his beloved nephew. In the midst of this celebration, Colonels Stark and Nixon walk down the Chelsea coast in what is today Revere towards what is today Winthrop, and they cross Bell Creek at low tide and enter Hog Island. This is where they cross, right here. We're standing right now in Belmarsh Isle Reservation, and this is where the provincials crossed from the mainland onto Hog Island. We are directly across the street from the famous former racetrack Suffolk Downs, and it is from here that the colonial forces are able to evacuate 411 sheep, 27 horned cattle, and 6 horses back across the mainland. Now, according to Corey's History of Malden, many of the Malden participants in this battle were actually the ones working as the drovers, the people moving the livestock across the water right here. But keep in mind, while all of this is happening, the British, who have been told this operation will occur, still do not know it is happening. Just as a side note, we have very few eyewitness accounts of this battle, and there has been little research done on the specifics of the Battle of Chelsea Creek. I'm relying heavily on a magnificent article by Craig Brown, Victor Mastone, and Christopher Mayo called The Revolutionary War Battle America Forgot, Chelsea Creek, 27th and 28th of May, 1775, published by MIT Press in the New England Quarterly, Volume 86, Issue 3. I've included a link in the comments. I highly recommend both the article and the New England Quarterly as a journal. The militias had agreed that any provisions that couldn't be taken with them should be burned. So when a small detachment of militia crossed from Hogs Island to Noddle's Island and found a barn and house full of hay and provisions, they set them on fire. But Noddle's Island is right on Boston Harbor, and the burning buildings of hay attracted the attention of the entire British squadron gathered to celebrate their commanding officer. So here we are looking at the modern-day Boston Harbor area, Malden outlined in red. Malden used to include the city of Everett, and here we have the city of Chelsea, which 250 years ago included Revere and Winthrop. Orient Heights right here, this was Hog Island, and then Noddle's Island was all of East Boston down here. The airport did not exist. So Admiral Graves and his fleet are dispersed in the waters around Boston Harbor, and when Admiral Graves was notified around 2 p.m. of the provincial presence on Noddle's Island, he immediately dispatched one of his vessels to sail up Chelsea Creek and cut off the militia's retreat, while other vessels landed Marines on the south side of Noddle's Island to push the militias back. The best ship for this task of sailing upriver in shallow waters is the HMS Diana under the command of his beloved nephew. But his nephew is still celebrating with him on his flagship, and Lieutenant Graves doesn't make it back on board his ship until 4 p.m., an hour after Royal Marines had landed on Noddle's Island and begun advancing towards the colonial troops, still mostly concentrated on Hog Island. As British Marines make their way up Noddle's Island, the HMS Diana is trying to flank them on the left, but when the Diana gets close to shore, the Chelsea militia under the command of Captain Samuel Sprague starts firing on the Diana from the village of Winnissemmit, where the ferry to Boston was. Now, there aren't a lot of primary sources available for the Battle of Chelsea Creek, but it's possible that Benjamin Blaney of Malden and some of his men were at this position. This is when Lieutenant Graves makes a critical error. The tides were unusually high, so a ship as small as the Diana could get farther up the creek than was safe. If Lieutenant Graves sails too far upstream, the ship will be stuck at low tide. At about 5 p.m., Graves and the Marines, using artillery borrowed from another British warship, started firing on the colonial positions as they retreated from Hog Island. The cannon fire could be heard by General Putnam in Cambridge, and he immediately dispatched reinforcements to Medford and Malden, and then made his way as quickly as possible to Chelsea. While Putnam is rushing from Cambridge, Lieutenant Graves finds the water around him slowly disappearing, and the Diana is suddenly at risk of beaching. Lieutenant Graves orders his men and other sailors in nearby longboats to pull the Diana to safety. But as the British pull the Diana back down Chelsea Creek towards the harbor, they find General Putnam's reinforcements, including artillery, firing on them from fortified positions near the Winnisimmet ferry. The men in the longboats are completely in the open, and to save themselves, they let the Diana loose. The Diana drifts towards shore, and eventually the ship tipped over and could no longer fire her guns. Another British warship, the HMS Britannia, pulled up alongside, and Lieutenant Graves gave the order to abandon ship. Graves intended to reboard the Diana in the morning, but at midnight, colonial forces boarded the Diana, took everything of value they could, and then set the ship on fire. Lieutenant Graves bravely tried to reboard the ship around 1 a.m., but was unsuccessful. Our militias apparently didn't take all the gunpowder off the ship, though, because at 3 a.m. on May 28th, the HMS Diana exploded. She was the first British ship captured and destroyed during the American Revolution. Multiple attempts to locate the wreckage of the HMS Diana have been unsuccessful, and since her destruction right here behind me in 1775, the Royal Navy has commissioned 7 more ships named Diana. There was some light skirmishing over the next couple days, including a return to Noddle's Island on May 30th, where the Patriots burned the last remaining home on Noddle's Island, but the British didn't intervene or seem to care because the home belonged to one of us, a rebel, although the destruction of that house did allow us to destroy other Royal Navy storehouses on the island. The British reported casualties of 2 dead and several wounded, but there are eyewitness accounts that indicate the British may have lied about their actual losses. One ship captain from Maine in Boston Harbor reported blood flowing from the deck of the HMS Britannia into the sea, and one Bostonian reported that 10 soldiers were buried in Boston after being killed in the fighting around Chelsea Creek. This Bostonian said that the reports were that 30 British were killed and even more were wounded. Now, why did the Battle of Chelsea Creek so easily disappear? Well, there are 2 substantial reasons for this. One is that the Battle of Chelsea Creek, after hours of bombardments from both the Royal Navy and fire from the Royal Marines, fording rivers and streams and harbors, boarding the HMS Diana, setting her ablaze and the resulting explosion, after all of that, the colonial forces had suffered 0 fatalities. That's right, no one on the American side died. And a battle with no dead means a battlefield with no memorials, and especially with no families seeking to have the world remember the losses they sustained at this battle. The Battle of Chelsea Creek quickly disappeared into obscurity. But there's another reason why the Battle of Chelsea Creek has been forgotten. 3 weeks from now, one of the bloodiest battles of the war will be fought on the other side of the harbor, and the carnage there is going to make Bunker Hill one of the most famous locations in America. And it will completely overshadow the Battle of Chelsea Creek, much like how the death of Christopher Sider at the hands of a British customs officer in 1770 was completely overshadowed 11 days later by the Boston Massacre. So the battle has been won, but the war continues. Admiral Graves is humiliated, General Gage's situation is increasingly desperate, and the Massachusetts Army now believes itself to be invincible, having fought the Royal Navy and emerging unscathed. So what happens next when 2 armies both believe defeat is impossible? See you soon.